So nothing on the car tonight, although earlier in the week I did zip up the road and got a new bottle of Etceterini. Is that leaking? No, I don't think so. It's just the regulator. I need to check when I get them. I think that's probably right, because it's only a small bottle, so this doesn't go into the full position on this gauge. These are just, I think they're D-size bottles, so they're quite small. But that means I'm ready to continue the welding in the weekend. I was watching some films on YouTube. There's a guy called Runge, I think his name is, Chris Runge. He builds basically aluminium bodied sports cars, hand built, and he has quite a few films, and he talks about shaping the aluminium and welding the aluminium. And one of the interesting things he talks about when he does is he welds from both sides on the joins. It looks like he definitely does that when he's TIG welding things. In a couple of his films he's making very curvy guards, and they're sort of split down the middle, and he's joining the two halves together, and he definitely welds from one side and then goes back and welds from the other side. So I don't think doing that is wrong at all. So the cool thing is, as you get more panels welded together, you need less clamps to hold everything together. So this will probably hold just with a couple of clamps at the bottom once that side panel is welded on. But because the welding is such a convoluted process and it's very messy and there's a lot of cleanup, that's a weekend job rather than an evening job when it's sort of winter evenings and cold and miserable. This, I've stained that, I just need to finish it off, and haven't done anything about the wiring. I've just been thinking about how that's going to work. So that's all to come. It's the weekend now. It's quite a nice day, a little bit chilly, but looks reasonably nice. I think I'll have to cut the grass a bit later if it's not wet. But I went out this morning. The local men's shed had their annual garage sale. It's just old tools. It wasn't too much there, but that was where I managed to get my bandsaw. I think it was 2 years ago. It was from the same place. That was like $120, so that was well worth the money. I wouldn't have been able to do the timber frame on the Riley without it. So I went up there again today for this year's sale, and I was 10 minutes early and it was already open and it was already stripped. Any sort of wood planes or anything, people were just grabbing handfuls of those. There was the one, whenever you go to swap meets and things like that, there's always one odious woman grabbing handfuls of everything. So she was there with her husband, literally pushing people out of the way to grab things. There was a box of files and she was just rummaging through that, probably damaging half the files. Just horrible people. There's always somebody like that at those things. I don't know why. But I managed to find a screwdriver. I quite like these vintage style wooden handled screwdrivers, so I'll clean that up. And the Landia shelving, which was, it was $10 for the shelving and $2 for the screwdriver. So that was all there really was there that was of interest to me. There's always lots of old circular saws and electric drills and things like that, but no, the shelving unit, I thought that was quite good. I need to figure out where I'm going to put it. I'm thinking I'll move that little table over there and use it as to continue my spray paint and glues and different liquids and greases and all of that. It'll be good storage for that stuff. This stuff is really good. I've got it in my lab as well. It's all adjustable. So there are little pins that you poke through the holes in the wood, and then you can set the height of the shelves. Really nice stuff. I think it was Joss who put me onto it in the first place when I was up in Auckland. And there was a place not far from us who used to sell it. They rescued it from old factories and things like that. $10 is an absolute bargain for this. I think normally you'd be paying at least $20, $25 just for a shelf. So really pleased with that. My little Meccano car I keep tweaking, so I need to put the bits I got the other day all through the evaporust, get the surface rust off them and give them a good spray with that ACF 50 so nothing rusts. I don't bother trying to clean it up too much. I'm not going to bother stripping it all and repainting it. It's just too much effort. I finished my little trophy thing. That's a mask I must have made probably 30 years ago. It's just been sitting up in a corner, so I'll sort of put that up. That came out pretty well. And I have more acetylene, so I will today do the weld on the other side. I've ordered new roll-lock discs, 40 grit I believe, to help grinding back the welds. And I've discovered a few more channels on YouTube. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but I'll put the links to them. Other people building aluminium cars. I found one recently where they're coach building a aluminium body kind of in the style of a GT40 on top of I think it's a Porsche Boxter chassis that they got. Being American, I think they swapped the engine with a V8. But there's some really interesting videos there of the chap making the panels and welding them and doing the aluminium welding. He's using TIG, but I'm pretty sure he also mentioned in one of his films that he welds from both sides. So that does seem to be the way to get the penetration. On film, it's hard to tell on the films, of course, but the welds look similar to what I'm getting. They are just lumpy and all over the place, and there is an awful lot of grinding that you end up doing. In one of the films, one of the different chap mentioned, you know, you see YouTube films of people TIG welding and they're doing what they call stacking dimes, where they get perfect little beads of weld. And he was saying, you know, you don't want that for this, because you want a good solid weld that you then file back to get it all smooth so you can metal finish it so it disappears. So we'll do this side next. I didn't show it, I think, in the last film, but I do tack everything before I weld it. So, for example, on this one, I'll clamp it at the ends, I'll tack it at the ends, and then I will force these two edges together and then tack this all the way along, every inch and a half maybe. And then it's good to knock the tops off the tacks if you can, to make it smoother, so that when you do your pass over the top, you just go straight over the top of the tacks and you're not adding bigger puddles of weld. It still ends up all lumpy and all over the place, but like I say, it'll all grind back. So I've got to sort out my little table, my little shelf unit. I've just realized it's not. That's better. I might adjust where that one is, and then I can start welding. I think it's probably the plan for the day. I've started welding up the second panel on this front half of the car, and I think I've been at it for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and that's just to get it tacked together. So these are my tacks here. I'm going to file off the tops of some of these where they're a little bit lumpy, but what I find is you have to clamp the panels together as tightly as you can, and they still move. So you end up having to stop quite often and hammer the edges of the panels to get them so that they're even on both sides. You don't want there to be any steps or your welds will go wonky. So it's a lot of do a tack, stop, turn the torch off because I don't want to waste gas, hammer and dolly just to get the edges smooth again, and then do another one. So it takes a long time. I'm going to clamp little pieces to the corners so that when I weld, I can weld onto another piece, and that gives me a nice weld at the end. But this needs a little bit of hammering, and as I say, I'll knock the tops off some of these, and then I should be able to do the weld all the way, which is kind of quicker than doing all the tacking because you don't have to keep stopping. And then I'll also flip the panel over and do the other side. What I'm finding is working really well for me is I mix up the flux paste, it's this here, and I brush that on the panel. But for the rod, I just dip it straight into the flux powder. If you heat it a bit in the flame and then dip it in, the powder will stick to the rod. I find that works much better than trying to paint the rod, to coat the rod, because then you're dealing with a wet, sticky, corrosive rod that you have to be careful where you put it down so it doesn't rust everything. It gets all over your hands, gets all over your camera and your tools. So this now is ready to file off and then do the whole weld scene. I've brought this outside to grind the tops, but I also wanted to show washing off the flux using just boiling water from the jug. And you can see it dissolves the flux off. I just find it easier to do this grinding. I think the camera's fogged up. Easier to do the grinding without all the flux there, and I don't want flux powder going everywhere. But with this flux that I'm using, you can see that the hot water just dissolves it quite nicely, the boiling water, which is good. So now I can knock the tops off those tacks and then take it back, weld it properly. Also have a look at the penetration. Isn't too bad. Some of those tacks have gone through, which is good. But that's what I find the hardest thing, is to get decent penetration. The only way I can do it is to weld from both sides. Knock down the tops of the welds. You don't have to get them flush, you just need to make sure they're not too lumpy. Just take the worst off. And I've clamped little pieces to the ends so that when I weld off the end, I'm not going to just blow a big hole, hopefully. And I've gone over it with the hammer and dolly to get the edges to match up. It's not, the curve is not correct, but the edges line up. That's the important thing. You fix the curve later. So I'm going to go ahead now and flux this whole join. I'll give it a scrub with my stainless steel brush and do the weld. Oh, the flux I'm using, I think I mentioned it last time, just aluminium welding flux. In New Zealand I got this from Arc Welding Supplies. Might need to order some more. It's one of these annoying things where the container is, when it arrives, it's half empty. So I haven't used too much so far. I've put this back together again. I ended up having to cut the weld that was there with a little junior hacksaw just to get the edges to come in a bit tighter. It wasn't perfectly tight. I did have a small gap there, but you can fill gaps like that. There's enough filler rod there to actually do that. And you can see I welded right up to the edge, and again here. And this is where not being able to get decent penetration on the first go actually helps me, because you can see the little aluminium plate doesn't get stuck to the rest of the aluminium. So on the other side of that, that should be nice and flush. Again, it's quite a lumpy weld. It is consistently lumpy. It's the same as it was on the other side. And how can we do this? I don't recommend propping things up on cardboard boxes because everything is hot and you can end up with fires. But it's a bit hard to see, but you can see on the inside the penetration is not good. You can also see where I've filled the holes. You tend to get a bit of a lump on the back where you've done that. So again, I think what I will do is I will go through and knock off those really lumpy bits on the inside, and then I'll flip this over and do another pass from that side. But, it's not too bad. It hasn't distorted too much. There is distortion there, but that'll all planish out. Well, welding up the inside. This is quite tricky because it's quite hard to actually be able to stand in a sensible place to be able to do it. And it's gone quite lumpy on me. And I've also blown a couple of really big holes. So I'm going to have to fill those up. I think what I'll do is clamp a piece of aluminium to the back or the front and try and fill it that way. I'll do that now quickly before the panels cool down too much. I may actually do it the other way around. Put something on the back and then do it, and then fill that up, and then that can all be ground back. So that did work, putting a panel on the back and filling it. It's got very lumpy there though, but as long as it's all fused together I can grind it back and it should be fine, and if there's any thin spots I can weld it again. So it's not so bad from that side. I might just go over it here just to make sure it's all fused properly, and I am boiling the kettle, so I'll take this outside and get all the flux off it once the kettle's boiled. Haven't done any grinding. I've just realised this is sitting too far forward, but the weld is very lumpy. It's going to be a lot of grinding to do tomorrow, but I think I'll be able to get that to clean up quite nicely. We'll see. I'd rather have a decent weld and lots of grinding than try to get the welds nice and not have it solid. So I just need to reposition this on the frame. It's not sitting in the right place because everything has distorted a bit, but it should come back to where it needs to be. And it's looking more or less correct. It's Sunday. As you can probably hear, it's raining. Maybe you can see. So I'm inside doing this aluminium grinding, which is a pain in the neck. Aluminium dust goes everywhere. But I've started grinding down the welds, and on the inside and the outside. One of the welds I may need to go over a little bit again. I'll see what it looks like from both sides. But the idea here is just to get the top off the welds so that I can now start hammering it and start filing it. So to grind off most of the weld, I've been using my 40 grit flat disc on the angle grinder, and I use a little bit of wax on it. That seems to help stop it loading up with dust. And then I've also been using my little roll-up things and my random orbit sander. But the idea here is just to get the welds, get all the extra material out of the way, and then you can start cleaning it up. It's interesting, this panel, it's quite floppy, but you can see it's got a twist in it now, a little bit of a twist, and I'm guessing it's because this piece was shorter than that piece, so there was more heat distortion on that longer side. It's definitely at the stage now where I can start hammering it, and it'll be a process of hammering it, trying to get it flat, still grinding off or filing off any excess, and you just keep working the shape like that. I've started the hammering and filing process. It's quite hard work because I have to do it on the ground at the moment. Ideally, I'd put it up on the frame so it's supported while I'm hammering it. But then, of course, this is one of the problems with using a timber frame. There's bits of it you can't get behind. So I have to take it off to make, you can get the shape right to get it on the frame. And then if you've got it on the frame, you can't get your hands in behind certain places. One thing worth noting is the aluminium doesn't have to touch the frame. It only really needs to touch where it's attached, which it will be because it's attached. So along here, for example, if there's a gap between the timber and the aluminium, it doesn't really matter. The aluminium's strong enough, stiff enough to support itself. So what I'm doing at the moment, because my welds are so lumpy, I got this, you get these little steps. So I'm not sure how far I should go to try and get rid of these little undercut things. As you hammer it, those will come up and you can file them off. But at some point I'm going to say, well, it's good enough. I don't need an invisible finish because this is going to be painted. So if you need a little bit of filler over some of these joins, I'm not too worried. But if you keep working at it, it does start blending together, like along here and along here. It gets easier and easier as you go, but of course it's getting thinner and thinner. The inside ends up cleaner as well because you're hammering it. So you've got the dolly inside there and you're hammering on it. At the moment I'm not using steel hammers, I'm just using my wooden mallet or the slapper, because I don't want to ding the metal, and I find it's a bit too easy to do that with a panel beating hammer. And this is my file I'm using. It's just a Vixen file, I think they're called. I've just got it screwed to a piece of wood to keep it flat, and it's just a matter of sort of filing it, hammering it, filing it, and you can feel this is getting harder and harder as you hammer it. So yeah, it's interesting. Once I get it smoothed out, I will put it back on the wheel, not to add much shape to it because the shape should be correct, but just to sort of smooth it out. As you wheel over it, it kind of evens everything out. And I think I need to put a little bit more curve in this, because now that it's welded, this is splaying out a lot more. You can pull it in with the clamps on the body. I have actually had it up on the body, but yeah, for now you can see I've done more on this side than this side. This is also starting to get to the limit of the length that I can easily do, because you need to be able to get your hands behind it to hammer and dolly. So if you've got a panel that's twice as long as this, you're not going to be able to do it. You won't be able to get to the middle of it. So I need to bear that in mind when I figure out exactly how I'm going to make the panels on the tail and where to join them. So for example, if I try and make a panel that goes all the way along there, I'm not going to be able to get in there to hammer it smooth. So that takes a little bit of thought where those joins are going to have to go. It does help that there's the big boot opening there, of course, so that means you can get your hands in. But yeah, I do remember that was a bit of a tricky thing on the Austin 7, just getting right into the tip of the tail on that. You can see this once it was all filed. You can sort of see where the welds were, but they more or less disappear if I've done it right. So it's just a matter of, I just need to keep doing that basically till it's all smooth. I think I've been going a few hours now. It takes a very long time. It makes a very big mess. I've ended up clamping the frame to my bench so that I can work this on something that's solid, because when it's loose and you're trying to hammer and dolly it and it's all flapping around, it's almost impossible. I think Kyle mentioned that in one of his recent films actually, about doing the rear fenders on his car. I'm sure he mentioned it needs to be bolted to the car so that you can really get the shape right. But this is definitely more springy out, so I have to have clamps on there to hold it in. And if I run my straight edge over it, it's a bit tricky with one hand. The shape along there is not too bad, but I think I've got a low spot down in the middle of the panel. If you follow that curve, I think it's low in here, so there might be a bit of wheeling there to put a bit more shape in, but it's getting there. It's now just a matter of hammer and dolly to bring up the low spots, flatten it out with the file. You can see why I use 1.6mm aluminium. It gives you a lot to file away before it starts getting too thin. There's no sign of the weld cracking. There's a low spot there. And this is what I mean about the timber frame getting in the way. I'd never actually thought of that until now. So I have to think, where do I put the welds? I think I did think of that before. I'm sure I've mentioned that before, about if I'd put the weld up in there, I couldn't get behind it to hammer and dolly it. But that side's getting there. This side I haven't done yet, so this is what it looks like when you've just ground down the top of the weld. There's still plenty to grind there, but I can start bringing that out. You can see the shape This shape needs adjusting, but it's not going to be too far off. Well, it shouldn't be. Yeah, the file looks pretty rough, but it actually smooths everything out, being a file. It looks like it's gouging everything up, but it's just because it works over such a large area. Oh, there's a lump there, I can feel that. A low spot there. Eventually you go over the whole panel with the hammer and dolly and file to get it smooth. But I'm pleased with how it's going so far. As I say, these little bits here, I'm sure you could fill those, but I'll keep working them, try to get them out. There's definitely a hole there, a little bit of a crater. This is quite a big one. I might try it, but things always look better on film or on YouTube than they are in real life. I think if I went over this with the random orbit sander now, you'd think it looked done, but no, there's a lot more work to do. I might actually try that just to see what it looks like. This is what it looks like. I went over this half with the random orbit sander. I haven't taken out all of the file marks yet, but most of them, and you can see how it all just blends together. You can definitely see the low spots though. That's a massive low spot there. There's like an edge there. Same there. These other ones are getting a bit smaller. You know, some of these are like high build primer type defects. And if you want to make it look even better than it actually is, you rub over it with a red Scotch pad. I just do it by hand. Pretty sure you can get these to go on the angle grinder as well. And that kind of just blends it all in. It gets rid of the random orbit marks. But yeah, you can see there's all sorts of little dings and dents and things that need to be finished in there, but the weld is actually, that's almost done. There's a low there, dings in there. Some of these are probably where I've not been careful enough with the little slapping spoon thing, but it's getting there. Yeah, so from back here, from back where the GoPro can focus to, it looks perfect. But no, it isn't. It's a lot of work. So the curve isn't too bad, I think. It's definitely hardened again. So people sometimes ask, why do you gas weld it and not TIG weld it? The gas welds leave everything annealed, so it's nice and soft. So it makes it easier to work the welds out. I think that's the main reason. Yeah, need to keep going. But again, this is now where I'm going to have problems, because to get these out, the frame's in the way. So I need to take it off the frame again. So down there I can get to, there's a big low there. Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of shape needed in here, I think. It's quite interesting how much you can feel. Like just looking at it, you can sort of see things, but as soon as you touch it, you can really feel things. This is why we have gloves. And then of course you can use your straight edge. Oh yeah, you can see the low there, even though that's not even curved. So a bit more to do, but I'm pleased with how this is coming out. It's really tiring. So obviously I'm a computer guy during the week. I'm more of a manager now these days, really. So it's not like I'm used to physical work. So half a day of this, I'm probably going to be knackered. But I think I should be able to get them both to a reasonably good stage. The other thing I want to do is actually weigh this, just to see how much this whole front half, the actual weight of it, it's not much. I have weighed the timber pieces before, but once I get it to an almost finished state, I think what I'll do is I can probably weigh it with all the clamps holding it on, and then subtract the weight of the clamps. give some idea of the actual weight of it. I've no idea how much the whole body's going to weigh. I'm hoping the whole car comes in under 800 kilograms, which I think it will. I can't remember what it was last time I weighed it. $674. So it's going to get a bit heavier, obviously. But yeah, from back here it looks like the front of a car, so that's good. A little bit more hammering and filing, that's getting there. The shape isn't quite right, so this is, it's not touching the timber there, but you can see there's definitely a low bit in the middle, so that needs a bit more shape. And the other thing I've decided is, I think the way I've done the frame, I've made a mistake here, having this edge. Like I say, you don't need the aluminium to actually touch everywhere, but this is a very sharp corner, and I think what's happening is it is actually touching there and it's putting a sort of kink in it. So I think what I'm going to do is, when I take the aluminium off the frame, I might get the router out and I'm going to cut this out. I'll relieve this so this sharp edge isn't up against the aluminium. With a bit more shape in here, I think that would fix it as well, because this is low here, like it's pulling this way, that's pulling this tighter up here, so putting the shape in there will help, but I think I can relieve that. Same on this side, pretty sure I can do with that with the router. I can't do it here because this is the top of the door, so you want a sharp fold there because this is going to fold over, and that's the top of the, oops, this is where the top of the door goes, so you want that to be a nice sharp fold. It's going to be interesting how I trim it in the corners there. That'll take a bit of thought because that's going to be a sharp corner. I think I'll make a circular corner and cut this so it's a tab. You don't want to just sort of cut in there and then fold the edges over, because that'll be a stress point and it would crack. So I think what I need is quite a generous radius, and these will be like tabs that fold round. I think that's how that'll have to be done. This is getting better, but I need to take this off because I need to get to that low spot there. Overall, it's coming along. Yeah, if I wheel a bit of shape into there, I think that's going to help. I might start on the other side. I need to, no, I should be able to get to that. The other annoying thing is, of course, with the hammer and dolly, sometimes you have to hammer and dolly with the other hand. So you have to practice holding the hammer in your left hand and your right hand. But of course you've normally got a sort of more dominant hand, and that's always easier. So trying to get these, for example, I have to hold the dolly in my right hand and hammer with my left, and sometimes I'm not quite as coordinated doing it that way than from the other side. There's aluminium everywhere. Yeah, I think I might start having a go at the other side now. My aim for today, it's 11:45 now, is to at least get this panel pretty much done. There'll be lots of hammering and dollying to go afterwards, but I think I want the welds at least all done basically to this stage, where it is now just hammer, dolly and file work rather than grinding. This side, yeah, this is, the file will take care of that, hopefully. Getting there slowly. The other question is, of course, how far do you want to go? If this was like a polished aluminium body, of course you have to go way further, but you know, like I showed before, this is the finish on the Austin 7. That's not finished and that's not perfect, but what I've found is, for the nature of the car, it's fine. Nobody questions it, nobody mentions it. I think it's a question, it's like those things, it's like if you build a show car, any small ding on it is going to show up and make the whole thing look bad. You've got the other end of the scale, which are like those rat rod things. That's not really my thing. I know other people are into it, but I think that's often an excuse for just bad workmanship, and they kind of can look too crappy. I just want honest vintage car with a bit of use, bit of history behind it. I guess I'm creating the history now. Might be a way to look at it, but we're getting there. Got the weld on the other side filed down. Started smoothing this out. You see I've got it clamped on the frame again. You just need to hold it, so it doesn't have to be clamped in the right position necessarily. You just want to be able to hold it secure. It's quite interesting now that I'm going to have to go through and wheel some of this to relax it, because I can feel it so much more under tension, and some of the shape's gone out of it. It's gone very hard again because of all the hammering, which is what you want. And the other thing I did, I'm using a cork sanding block so I don't mark the panel. Get rid of this. Is I sanded off that sharp corner. I'm going to have to retreat that and then restain it. Same on the other side, just with the flap disc and the random orbit and a bit of sandpaper, and that's taken that sharp corner away, which is good. Except everything is now covered in sawdust. I think I dislike sawdust more than I dislike aluminium dust or steel dust, because it goes everywhere. It travels further and it coats everything. It's horrible stuff. So this panel should now be smooth enough to do a bit more shaping on it, wheeling on it, just to try and relieve some of the stresses and things in it. I'll give that a try and see what it looks like. There's still a lot of work to do on it to get the rest of the panel smooth. You can still see wheeling marks in it. It all needs planishing, but where the welds are has come out okay. And I've been tweaking the shape. I did put a little bit more curve into it around that area. This is where I really need a bigger wheeling machine. Not because this one isn't doing it, it's because the machine is physically too small, and I could only just get that panel in there with the bottom of it sort of banging against the bottom of the machine. So I can see why those big giant cast iron machines are as big as they are. It's not just for rigidity, it's just so you can fit bigger panels, which kind of makes sense. And I've been adjusting the shape, and I think I've got it to the point where there's more twist in it now than shape missing. So it's just the fact that there's a little bit of a twist in this panel, meaning it isn't quite sitting flat. I think there needs to be a little bit more shape in the bottom, but we're talking about curve. If you clamp it, it all fits fine. It'll actually, if you were hammering these edges around, you could pull them round, but I want to get it fitting a little bit better. Washing over it with the wheel definitely helped. It took all the stresses from the hammering out of it, and these sort of relaxed. You could physically feel that the panel was sort of going more relaxed. It's really hard to describe. And I think I need to do a little bit more of that, and I want to get this to fit, you know, as the best that it can be when it's just sort of draped over it. There's a little bit too much. Again, it's curve, not shape in the top. I need to flatten the top out. It sits like that. It just needs to come down a bit. But again, once it's clamped, it's okay. This side, you can see I just went over it with the random orbit. I can't tell how it looks on the little camera. The little screen is way too small to see any detail. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like on my computer screen when I have to stitch all these together. I've just given it a clean as well, and just a really quick once over with the random orbit. I'm not sure if you can see it. Yeah, I think you can. You can see how that's just touched the high spots. There's all these waves in it, little waves. So you want to get all of those out. You can't even really, it's kind of interesting. You can barely feel them. Most of them I can't feel. It's not like the panel feels like that, but you can see it. It looks like there are low spots, and there are. So again, if there's a skimmer filler on things, I'm not too worried. It's going to be painted. So I think I might do a little bit more messing around, just trying to get the fit of this a little bit better, and then probably that'll be enough for today. You can see the wheel and tracking marks in it even. And now, because it is such a big awkward panel, it's a bit harder to wheel. But I mean, from 6 feet away it looks perfect, so that's good. I'll do that, and I will have a go at weighing it. Let's see what it sort of all comes in at, and then I need to do a big tidy up. There's dust everywhere. Probably can't really see. Aluminium dust all over the place. I tried to do it all heading in that direction, covered up the bike so that wouldn't get covered, but there's stuff everywhere. So yeah, I'm pleased with how it's coming along. I've been through and I've had a good clean up. I need to wipe down some of my tools, hammers and dollies and things, just because it's winter and condensation's a problem and everything rusts right there. Had a good clean up, and I can't remember if I mentioned before about the file, using the file. Most people know this. You're only really supposed to push a file in one direction. It just cuts going forward, and you're not meant to drag it backwards. I always think of them like reamers in machining, where a reamer you only ever run one direction, you never run it backwards, because it'll dull the cutting edge. I've found, I don't know if that really happens, or really happens that quickly, if it makes an appreciable difference to the life of the file, but if you go forwards and backwards, the file does clog up a lot more. But what I've found is it also gives you a much cleaner cut, and the surface is much smoother if you only go forwards. So that's why I do it. Not so much because I'm worried about it damaging the file, but yeah, only cut forwards, and I find I get much better results. So I've taken that off, and I did just throw the panel on the car, is how I think they put it at Cold War Motors, somewhere like that. It's just sitting there. The frame's just sitting on the chassis. It doesn't have its little rubber buffers underneath it, so it's a little bit low. But just to give an idea of how that'll look, and I think it looks pretty good. I've got it fitting reasonably well now. It's not tucking in because of the rivets on the chassis. The rivet heads are hitting it. Mr. Tweed just did a film where he was replacing a panel that I don't have on my car, which I think his one goes underneath there somewhere, underneath the radiator, and he was talking about the rivet heads. They're quite big. If they're similar to mine, they stick up quite a long way, so yeah, you need to clear around those. But it's looking like the right shape. I haven't trimmed the edges yet. That will be another job. And I did a little bit of research, and I asked a few people about what sort of panel pins to use, and it's just plain steel panel pins. I just need to get some that are decent quality. The ones at the hardware shops are all really crappy, and the heads are barely formed. So possibly a woodworking store might have something a bit nicer. I want consistent heads on them, so that when you, basically what you do is you fold the panel around the edges, you drill little holes, and then you punch them in, so that when the panel pins go in, they're flush. But it's not quite sitting all the way down, but gives an idea of what it's going to be like. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how that's come out, but I'm done for the day. That was a lot of work just to get that done, and then cleaning up. So I'm probably just going to have a quiet afternoon, relax for the rest of it. It's raining still, so I can't do much in the garden. might just go watch some of the other channels. I'll put some links in the description of this film of some of the other channels I watch where they're building aluminium bodied cars. So there's obviously lots of steel work out there, and if you want to see how to do that really nicely with lots of really good tips and techniques and tricks and showing how to actually do it, have a look at Carter Auto Restyling. Kyle is really good, and he explains it really well, and he shows it how he's doing everything. So if you want to know about steel, check him out. I don't know if he does aluminium. I'll have to ask him, but I'll post links to some of the channels I've been watching recently where they're building aluminium bodied cars. I can't remember the name of one of them. I mentioned it the other day, where they've got a Porsche Boxter, and they've re-engined it, I think. I haven't watched that far back in the early films, and they're rebodying it in a sort of GT40 type style with an aluminium body, which looks pretty neat. I think that seems like quite a cool project, because I've seen it done before where sometimes people just take one of those supercars, usually a Corvette, and they just strip the body off and put a roll cage on it and call it done, which I guess is a thing. But coach building an aluminium body for a modern car, that's pretty cool. So I've been enjoying watching that. But I think that's where I'll leave it for the weekend. I just realized I can't finish there because I forgot to mention I did weigh the aluminium and also the timber frame. The timber frame is about 8 kilograms, and the aluminium skin on the front here is about 4.1 kg. So just over 12 kg for the front half of the car. Obviously there'll be some nuts and bolts and things to add to that as well. That's not too bad, I think. I'm assuming the back is going to be maybe twice that again. So yeah, don't think that's too bad. I'm not sure. Obviously if you didn't have the timber frame, it would be much lighter, which is why the race cars, I think, were just straight aluminium. I'm not sure what sort of frame they had. I don't think it was timber. But the road race type cars with the doors definitely had the timber frame. So yeah, all up about just over 12 kg for that front half of the car.